today is Ms. Kuik Shiao, Executive Director of Common Ground. Ms. Kuik will be speaking about individual resilience, its dimensions and impact on health. Ms. Kuik is a co-founder and leader of the Thoughts Collective, a group of social businesses whose mission is to build up social and emotional capital in Singapore. She has also served as a nominated Member of Parliament in the 12th Parliament of Singapore, speaking in Parliament about issues surrounding inclusivity in economic participation and civic participation. Let us give a warm welcome to Ms. Kuik. Ms. Kuik, please.
Thank you. Well, this is the whole strange new world that we're in, where I'm talking, but I don't really know who I'm talking to. But wherever you are, yeah, I hope you are well. And I really hope that whatever I share today, that there is something meaningful for you in it. I'm gonna share my slides right now. So give me a second. Let me move into the other screen so I won't block. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to speak to you on is how do we develop personal resilience. And what I think the first thing that struck me is, when do we actually need that resilience the most? You know, resilience is not something you think about until you need it. And the situation that usually triggers it is a crisis. Now, I don't know what you have gone through in the last 18 to 20 months. And maybe the word crisis doesn't resonate with you. Maybe it really does. Whatever it is, I know for sure that you've probably had your personal resilience tested somewhat, right? Because for the first time, at least for our generations, we're experiencing not just a national crisis, but a global crisis together, right? It's just weird, right? To know that every single person in the world is joined by that. No one is left untouched by the pandemic, right? So resilience now is no longer just a theory to us, I hope, but it becomes a real thing, you know. And even for those of us who are, let's say, more privileged than others, we may not have understood crisis, or we've been relatively buffered by crisis. Those who have less privilege, every day could be a crisis. And now we're all just sort of like all joined at the hip. Now we all are going through something together. So at the beginning of Circuit Breaker, during 2020, I actually read this book called Upheaval, which is how countries survive crisis and change, right? And actually, while this book was about how the system, or how a community, right, it gets more and more resilient, actually the beginning chapter of this book was centered on the personal, and I really liked how he defined it. So I'm going to start by sharing this definition with you. So he said a crisis is a decisive turning point when the conditions before and the conditions after are significantly different, right? So I want you to consider that when I say that you probably have gone through a crisis, you've had your resilience tested, I want you to check in with yourself from 2020 all the way to today. Was there a moment somewhere in these weird 18 to 20 months where there was a turning point? Things before that was one way and things after that were another way. And what did that look like for you? And the other definition he offered in this book is that a crisis is both a single moment of truth, as well as a culmination of many issues that have been building up over a very long time. And I think that's something that we have not fully appreciated about this pandemic, that we might see it as, wow, pandemic, like, wow, circuit breaker, one single moment of truth. But the truth of it is, I think for many marriages, friendships, families, teams, organizations, that single moment of truth also revealed many, many issues that have been building up over a long time. So for example, if let's say you are a guy who has been addicted to work, never come home, you know, always working all the time, right? Always say like, "Aya, daddy, no time to come home and play with you lah." Suddenly now gonna work from home, right? Now you have to work from home for 18 months. And whatever issues you had about being at home or your addiction to work, it's all gonna come out, right? So that's a small example of what I mean by what looks like a single moment of truth could actually be a culmination of many, many issues building up over a long time, right? And so I share this two definitions with you, not to make it very intellectual, but to use that definition to make sense for yourself. Did I go through a decisive turning point where before that and after that very different? Did I experience not just a single moment of truth, but actually there were many, many issues that were there already, and it just all came bubbling out in these 18 months. And as you sit with that, I'm going to share with you something that kind of like freaked me out when I read this in the introduction, okay? And he said that, so his beginning chapter, he talked to people who help individuals through personal crisis. And he said this, a frequent observation by those helping others through a personal crisis is that something happens within a time span of about 6 weeks. And during that short transitional period, number one, we question our cherished beliefs. Number two, we start to become a lot more receptive to personal change than during our long period of stability. And here's the kicker, right? After we question our beliefs and after we have this relative period of openness to change, what happens next is we can't live for much longer without going to some coping mechanism, because there's only so long that we can grieve or suffer or feel angry or stay unemployed, whatever that has happened. And what happens is within these 6 weeks, three possible paths open up for every one of us. Either number one, you start to explore a new way of coping that will ultimately be successful and healthy, a really healthy new way of coping. Option two, you embark on a new unhealthy way of coping with whatever has happened. And option three, you double down to your default old unhealthy ways, except you double down and made it even worse. So this, I tell you why this freaked me out, because first, that time period of 6 weeks is like very close to circuit breaker, right? And if you like, when I read this, I thought, wow, it's like this, the world or our country was put through, without us knowing it, we were all put through a huge psychological experiment where we were all forced to change our behaviors in this time span. And during this, you probably questioned some beliefs, you probably were forced to change some of your own behaviors. And after that, you couldn't take it anymore. You found a new way of coping. And then out of these three paths, right, my curiosity is, of all of us listening in this room and beyond this room, how many of us picked path one? And how many of us picked path 2 and 3? Because only one path, the first one, is healthy, and the other two are not great. While you're sitting with that, let me share with you another thing that I read during circuit breaker that comes together with this, right? So I came across this article about the midlife unraveling. And what that opened up for me is there's this whole pandemic thing that is testing us, and that's bad enough, right? And all this coping strategy stuff. Now, I think if you are going through this time and you are in your middle of life, which means you are late 30s all the way till, let's say, about early 50s, this would have been a double whammy for you. Okay, so in this article, I'll just read for you the choice parts, all right? We sometimes think of midlife as a crisis, but it's not. In midlife, think of it as a developmental milestone where, for some reason, in the late 30s onwards, your mental models and coping strategies will be challenged and forced to unravel, whether you like it or not. You start to, these old coping mechanisms or old coping strategies that helped you throughout your childhood, your teenhood, your youth, your 20s, your early 30s, you developed a set of coping mechanisms that were there to protect you, to stop you from getting hurt. And somehow, when you reach your late 30s and 40s and 50s, these old coping mechanisms somehow just don't work anymore. They were the armor that you had created to protect yourself. But you start to realize this is actually getting in the way of where I want to go. So, for example, you could have grown up very, I want to please people, I want to make them happy. And it's nothing bad about that, but it could have been done to protect yourself. And maybe in your late 30s, early 40s, it suddenly becomes clearer and clearer to you that, hey, this pleasing people is making me actually feel quite angry inside. Like, not everybody I want to please. Why am I pleasing them? Right? And you start to feel like, maybe I shouldn't be so sweet all the time. Maybe I should be a lot more upfront about the things that I want. Anyway, that's a small example, right? But late 30s to early 40s, this is when you really start to question, is all of these ways of being, all these ways of coping, are they working for me or not? Right? And to deconstruct your coping strategies, right? To develop these healthier new coping strategies, right? That Jared Diamond had talked about in Upheaval, like, you go in the healthier path is to develop new coping strategies. It's not that easy. Not everyone takes that path. And many more of us prefer to take path 2 and 3, which is not healthy, because to tear down the walls that you spent your whole life building, it feels like death. It feels like I'm killing a part of me. It is really difficult to change your behavior, right? And it's really hard, right? So I bring your attention to that last quote at the bottom. It's as if we spent that first half of our lives shutting down feelings to stop the hurt, developing all these weird coping strategies. And then the second half, as things break down, as things are not working anymore, we now have to go and open up ourselves inside and like figure out what's going on. What do I need to heal from? How do I need to change? And that's not easy and that's not fun. And I think my curiosity is, how many of us have gone through the last 18 to 20 months? We are middle-aged. We were already in this weird process of like, trying to figure out like, how do I need to change? And then the pandemic hit, which brought many more issues to the fore. And that's what makes me very, very, just curious. Do you actually feel that you came out of this last 18 months more resilient, less resilient, or you don't even know what is resilience? So I share this to start you really processing inside you, right? Your own story, because I don't want you to hear this from a theoretical point of view. Now, let me go into my second part, which is, okay, fine, I get it now. Personal resilience, very relevant, very important, triggered by a crisis. All right, so fine. How can I develop it? Now, I think that in Singapore, we have a habit, right? We have a very practical culture. And in our very, very practical culture, we might have been raised to believe that life is all about how I do things and what I need to do. How to do it, what to do. How to do it, what to do. And our work and our life, our personal and professional life, can be just consumed with the whats and hows of life, right? And we can live our whole life just around that without questioning any further, right? What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? Now, if we live life that way, and It's not wrong, but this is called living life from the outside in, right? What to do and how to do it has always been all about the outside, right? And if this is your only way of living, if you listen to people who have been living so long in this space, you will hear there is an inner emptiness. They are searching for something, right? And they will usually say things like, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't know who I'm doing it for. I don't know who I am as I'm doing this, right? They are trying to, from the outside, figure out their inside, right? I'm going to say that again. It's like they're trying to do all the work on the outside to figure out what's inside. And this way of living does not lead to resilience. In fact, it leads to a lot of instability because the whats and hows of life are always going to change. It is fundamentally uncertain. You can't put all of your bets or your certainty on what's and hows. It's always going to change, right? What's this like? You know, the soup making like a strategy that Sweet Fun was just sharing about, like how do we deliver the soup? What are we supposed to do next? Right? It just changed overnight, whether you wanted it or liked it or not, right? And what we talk a lot less about in our very practical culture is the inner concentric circles of why and who, right? Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? Who am I? Why am I? This is the space of identity, which is who, and values, which is why, right? It is a lot more healthy to live your life from your why and your who. Now, you may think I also philosophical. Who got time for this kind of philosophical thing, right? I don't have time to think about my identity and my values, but I think it's actually the most practical thing you can do, especially if you care about resilience. This opposite way of living, which is let me live my life or make my choices from the inside out. That means if I'm trying to figure out what to do next, how to do it, if I'm trying to figure those questions out, I don't just spin in circles around the what and how. Instead, I go inside and check in with myself. Okay, who do I care for? Who am I? Why do I want to do this? Why do I care about that? And when you have that clarity inside, certain whats and hows become a lot sharper. Like, okay, we cannot do that because that goes against what we stand for. We cannot do that because that goes against our mission. I cannot do that. That goes against my values. And that will hurt the people that I care about. So when you hear people talk like that, you get a sense of people who are checking in with their why and who. And that is a very stable, trustworthy place to come from. It's like, think about it, it's like a psychological anchor, a foundation inside you. Your identity and your values, your why and your who, are much, much less subject to change. You know, the external environment can change, but your internal environment should not change that much. And because it doesn't change that much, and because you have chosen your identities, you have chosen your values, and I hope that when you choose your identity and values, you chose something which is not, that shakable, right? But because you have that psychological bedrock, you have this profound clarity. And that clarity is what gives you a lot of certainty when things are uncertain. You know, what to do, how, oh my God, pandemic, how, Papa lost his job, that kind of stuff. But, and when people are freaking out about the what's and hows, they tend to gravitate towards people, or they gravitate inside their soul to check in, like, okay, all right, well, where do I want to go? And you may not hear yourself or hear people use the who and why language, but in essence, they are going back to their first principles. Like, okay, I may have lost my job, but I love my family. I want to make sure they don't panic. Okay, all right, so my first priority is maybe let me take the Grab food job first, because at least I get some money in the bank, because I'm doing this out of love for my family. Then I will do this because I also want to make sure that I'm true to my creative skills, but they're checking their identity and their values. That's called living life from the inside out, right? Now, so as you're hearing this, you might think, oh, okay, so very easy like that. Does that mean if I live my life inside out, my who and why, then I will confirm, chop, be resilient, have straight path to success? Is it like that? Well, let me add on another framework, right? To bring us to a close. There's a very lovely and profound piece of research that I read where people discovered that there are 3 types of family or life narratives that all of us are brought up with. And generally, there are these 3 narratives, okay? And maybe you can sense which one is yours. The first type of family raises their children with this kind of narrative, the ascending narrative, which is life is always good, boy, life is always full of possibilities. Once mama and I were poor, but then we worked hard, we studied hard. I became a doctor, your mama became a banker, and you too, my son, will be really, really great if you study hard, right? So that's the ascending narrative. Life is always about possibilities. The second narrative that parents could raise their children around is the descending one, which is a boy, once upon a time, your grandpa was very, very rich. I also came from my side also came from a rich family, but then your daddy's side all like philanderers, and then like mama's side all like don't know what lah, all got drug problems. So you work so hard for what? You study hard for what? Whatever lah, life will kick you when you're down. Okay, life is always full of problems. That means that it's never going to be on the up, right? It's always on the down. And what the researchers discovered is that neither the ascending narrative nor the descending narrative resulted in resilient children, right? Because these 2 narratives are fundamentally lies. Life is not always going to be full of possibilities, and life is not always going to be full of problems. So what they discovered is that there is a third kind of family narrative, right? Which sounds more like this. Okay, so mama was poor and then daddy was poor, but then when we got married, we worked very hard and life was great. We had a chicken rice shop, we did really, really well, and then our recession hit, and we lost everything and it was really hard. Our marriage nearly broke down, but we got some help and we started to make waves, and it was hard. Sometimes that job didn't work, but all in all, boy, if we stick it together, we care for each other, no matter what happens, you'll be okay lah. Life got problems one, but as long as we work together, you'll be okay. And this is the oscillating narrative. That means it's an understanding that there is always ups and downs to life, but in general, it's heading towards somewhere purposeful, somewhere good. And to get there, you're going to need other people to get through. Those are the general themes of the oscillating narrative. The up and downness, but the end point is going to be somewhere purposeful and somewhere good in general. And you need other people. Those are the big 3 themes of the oscillating narrative. And that is actually what creates resilient children, because it gives them a more realistic view of the world, and it's realistic and optimistic at the same time. It's not either or, it's both. This is what some people call bounded optimism. And the oscillating narrative creates resilience in people because it gives us optimism with boundaries. And those boundaries are the boundaries of reality, the boundaries of the brutal facts of life, right? And I want to share with you this last reference, right? I don't know if you've heard of this book or this paradox, but I'll explain it to you. It's found in the book, right? This thing about oscillating narrative and bounded optimism, it is best encapsulated by this small little story that Jim Collins shared. It's called the Stockdale Paradox. So Jim Collins was trying to understand what made some companies or some leaders very resilient, and he decided to interview this prisoner of war called Admiral Stockdale, right? And he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7.5 years, and it was pretty crummy, situation that Stockdale was in. So Collins wondered, wow, if I read this memoir and it feels so depressing for me, like if I was Stockdale, I would have killed myself. I don't know how he was resilient and survived like his time as a POW, right? How did he survive when he was there and he didn't even know the end of the story? He didn't know where things were going. Why didn't he just kill himself? So when he asked Stockdale, what Stockdale said is, well, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that I would get out, but I also felt that I could prevail in the end and I would turn this experience into the defining event of my life. That means I believe that there was going to be an end point, and I believe that somehow I'm going to learn something through this. And more importantly, right, when Collins asked him, okay, so who didn't make it? Who like had no resilience? And wow, Stockdale said, right, it's the optimists, all the optimists who said, don't worry, we'll be rescued by our side by Christmas. Huh? Christmas came, no one rescued, and never mind, confirmed chopped by Easter. Huh? Easter, no? Thanksgiving, huh? Christmas. And actually what Stockdale said is these optimists, these relentless optimists who refuse to look at the brutal facts, right? He died of a broken heart. And this is the quote that Jim Collins like really puts forth as the Stockdale Paradox. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever that might be, right? We must have faith that we will prevail in the end. But at the same time, you must have that discipline to see the brutal facts of current reality. And when you apply this, right, to the current state of where we are in the pandemic and all that, you can see it around that the people who are most like losing it, not resilient anymore, getting extremely angry and complaining, right, are those who maybe started off being very, very optimistic that a rescue will come soon, right, somewhere in this 18 to 20 months. And as that rescue period started being stretched or taken away, they lose more and more heart, right? It's hard. So last slide. In essence, if you want resilience, live from your who and why. Use that to clarify your next steps in the ever-changing, always unstable what and how. But live from that anchor of my who, my why. Then I will know what to do in the what and hows. And then remember, take that oscillating narrative as you make those next steps. You must never ever confuse faith that you prevail in the end. Don't ever lose that. But don't ever lose perspective that there are brutal facts of reality that we must learn to see. So, thank you.